So Tiara, just tell me about how things are going for you. Have you had any significant changes to your schedule or your diabetes management since the COVID-19 outbreak?
Yeah. So, before the COVID-19 outbreak, I felt like I was on a roll. I had just started an insulin pump and I was going to the gym every day. And my blood sugars were really getting to where I needed them to be. And then the outbreak happened and it kind of flipped everything on its side where I'm not exercising as much. I am eating, my diet hasn't changed as much, but I have kind of eaten a bit more junk food than more junk food than recently. So I am starting to see, those elevated levels of glucose. Um, and of course, like the stress and anxiety from COVID-19 sometimes put diabetes to the back of my mind instead of the forefront where it should be all the time. So,
Yeah, and I think what you're going through, a lot of us with diabetes are experiencing right now. And I think it might be a good idea to take a look at some of your data to kind of see what we can do to help you kind of reevaluate your goals for your self-management during this time and see how I can help you reach them.
great. Yeah, let's do
Awesome.
that.
So the first thing we're going to do here is look at the percent. Oops. This percent times CGM was active. So she has 94% captured data, which is fantastic. So there's that. So then, so Tiara, the next thing that we're going to do is I want to ask you, what do you feel went well over the past couple weeks for you? I know you said it's been a tricky time. It's been a tricky time for everyone just because of all of the changes to our lives, but what do you think's been going well with your diabetes?
That I've still been able to get insulin like I need, and that I still have, my pump supplies. I'm still, you know, using my CGM on a regular basis and putting in as accurate as carb counts as possible. And I'm still exercising. I may not be going to the gym, but I'm still going for walks every day. So that really gives me some things to be proud of with my diabetes right now. Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm still finding ways to eat relatively healthy. Like I'm still probably eating a bit too much junk food than normal, but I haven't stopped eating like vegetables or fruits. I still have like at least a piece of fruit every day. And I still try to work in something green at least once a day every day. So those are still some things that work for me.
Well, that's fantastic. It sounds like you have a lot of positives, a lot of bright spots right now. And that's what I love to hear, that you can find a lot of positives. So what I really liked that you touched on is that you are still figuring out creative ways to exercise. So I think that's great. I think creativity right now, which it sounds like you are using, is so essential to making sure that you feel well and that we're able to still help you manage your diabetes. So congrats on everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Um, yeah. And then I also really liked that you said you feel like you've been entering accurate carbs into your insulin pump, because if I were to look through your insulin pump download, that would be incredibly helpful for me as a provider to see. It's really difficult when patients don't enter in carbs accurately because it's hard for me to evaluate if your carb ratio needs to be changed or not. So awesome. All right. So then on my end here, what I want us to look at is time and range. So that's kind of in this, I don't know, I'm putting my cursor on it. If you can see it, can you see it? What I'm
Yep.
circling? Yeah, so we'll look at the green. So the green is the time between 70 to 180. And do you know why we use the 70 and 180 targets for that?
Can you explain to me and the audience?
Yeah. So the reason why we have 70 as the lower end is because any blood sugar under 70 is considered low blood sugar or hypoglycemia. So we want you to stay above 70. And then the reason why we have 180 here as the higher end is because, when you eat food or when you're stressed or anything like that, your blood sugar will go up throughout the day, right? And that's totally normal, even for people who are taking insulin. But the reason why 180 is that higher end is because the American Diabetes Association targets for 2 hours after you're finished eating a meal are to have a blood sugar below 180. So we know you'll go up, but but the goal is 2 hours later after you eat to be below that 180. So anything higher would be in that hyperglycemia range for the purposes of the CGM reports. So the goal for time in range here, it depends on what your A1C goal is. So if your A1C goal is less than 8%, the goal time in range is greater than 50%. And then if your goal A1C is under 7, the goal time in range is 70%. So Tiara is doing great. She's really this is the first time I'm working with her and looking at her target, her time in range here, and she's already at 59%, which is great for baseline. And that's awesome. And then another thing that's really awesome about this is that her time low is only 1%. So I always look at lows after I look at that time in the green. For lows here, 1% is fine. We wouldn't want to see too many lows, like 4% or greater, or depending on what your goal is, it could be slightly different. So I think what we can minimize, and you let me know what you think, is maybe we can go through and take a look at the times that you're high and see if we can come up with any solutions to try to help you minimize that.
Yeah, I definitely want to. And one thing I noticed when I was looking at my data for this time was seeing that the time I'm high or very high is also coincided with like the times I would eat dinner. So I know
Okay.
that kind of relationship there. And so what that told me was that what can I do to minimize my highs in the evenings before I go to bed? And if I'm having trouble with that, why? Because for me it's like, is it really food, or is it like, am I afraid of going low at night? Which I think it's a little bit of all of that.
That's so insightful. So wow. So you just thought of all of the roots of that. So we can kind of go through and take a look, but it could be that, or if you see this on a report, it could be fear of hypos. That's a really, really important one to bring up. We see that a lot. But if you look at her report, she's actually kind of staying high here from 3 p.m. on. So it may also be, she's not staying lower here and then going up after dinner. It looks like maybe it's starting before dinner in the afternoon. So maybe that's something we can take a look at together, and see if you need some insulin changes, if maybe there's some other things that we can talk about, like maybe seeing if what you're eating that time of day is balanced. But a lot of times when you see this on reports with people with type 1, it really has to do with needing insulin adjustments.
And I have a question. If I were someone
Yeah.
with type 2 and you saw the same data, what could be some of the reasons for that?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So, with the reports with people with type 2, when I go to the day-by-day report, sometimes I see less variability. And the blood sugar is not going to be 100% flat line. Like, you will see up and downs, but a lot of times it's not like swinging super low and then up like people who are having low and high blood sugar. This is specific to people who are not on insulin.
Mm,
Right. So if they're not on insulin, you're not going to see those swings as much.
okay.
Usually. And so a lot of times when I'm going through reports with people with type 2, if they're on oral medications and they're already on a dose that their prescriber thinks is right for them, we can kind of talk about, are you stressed? What are ways that we can kind of cope with that? Are you able to go on walks throughout the day or kind of move around a little bit? And if you do, that might help minimize some of this. And then a lot of it too is just showing them. I always use the food plate and I show them I don't put food on it because I like people to pick out what they want to eat themselves and what works for them. But I always just kind of show them as, you should try to fill it with half non-starchy veggies and then a quarter of it with your protein of choice and then a quarter with your carbohydrate of choice. And that method, to help balance out, works pretty well with a lot of people with type 2 who, when you're seeing those spikes at meals, specifically on these Libre reports. Yeah. So before we go into the daily, like the day-by-day reports, I do want to just look up here kind of at the average glucose. I do usually look at that. And you'll see below it, it has the glucose management indicator. So that glucose management indicator, or the GMI, it's taking what the average glucose is based off of all of those CGM readings, and it's giving what it would predict your A1C to be. It's not always 100%, but it is based on this data. So that's what the predicted A1C would be for Tiara. And then I always look at the glucose variability here. So, Tiara, you're doing great with your glucose variability.
Wow, I am so happy to hear that, because that is something I've always been worried about. Complications are always something that I'm always afraid of. Not necessarily things like DK isn't always at the top of my mind, but I'm always worried about heart disease, and stroke. And I'm always worried that variability in my glucose would contribute to that. So
Yeah.
just seeing that I'm below target is, empowering to me to keep, making even better decisions in my management. And Julia, and please let me know if I have the right line of thinking here, that
Yeah.
this kind of makes it all more important that we get that 94% at the top
Yeah.
of active data, because that 94% makes the average glucose and the GMI and variability numbers a little bit more true. Like, you can rely on those numbers more because we have 94% of that data.
Exactly. And as someone who is a self-proclaimed statistics lover, because I do research, it's really important to have accurate data. So that's why, yeah, the first thing I did was I looked at, okay, is she wearing, or not wearing necessarily for you, but scanning frequently enough to capture most of the data? Because if you're not, like, I've seen reports where they only have like 20% captured data, and then you can't really look at the average glucose or the glucose variability, and then you don't really see patterns, because you kind of get these breaks in this nice line that you see here,
Mhm.
and not everything's captured, and we want it to be accurate, and we want to help you. So,
Right. Great
all
point.
right. So, Tiara, you already talked about some of the patterns that you're seeing. So we're actually going to go down now and kind of look at your day by day reports, if that's okay with you.
That's fine.
All right. So we're going to go down. I'm going to skip over some of this here, just for time's sake. But this, actually, I'm going to stop here for a second. This summary is really important because it shows how many times she's scanning. So if she had missing data here, I could then look over here and see, wow, she's only scanning. Well, you scan a lot per day, so you don't count. But but it would say if she wasn't scanning enough.
Right.
So, and it also gives the average glucose of the day too, which could be very cool if I wanted to see, oh, is she higher on Saturdays and Sundays because her schedule is different than weekdays? And you'd be able to see that reflected here as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to go down now though to my favorite part. So my favorite part of the report is actually looking at the daily logs. Because I think it's kind of like putting pieces of a puzzle together, trying to figure out not only what happened, because there's so many different factors that impact blood sugar, but it's kind of, a lot of times when you talk to patients about what we're seeing on these daily logs, they learn a lot and they kind of reflect on a lot of their own self-management. So I love this part. So Tiara, we're going to start here with February 8th, and I need to move something on my computer. Okay, I can see it better now. So tell me about these couple days. What do you see? Do you see any patterns where your blood sugar is going up or down at the same time?
Yeah, so I noticed, like, basically from noon to about 3 o'clock is when my blood sugar is mostly in range. And looking at this is on a Saturday. So my schedule is definitely different here than possibly than a work week schedule.
Okay.
Um, because I typically don't eat between 12 and 3. I may not have anything to eat until later in the afternoon, closer to that 4 o'clock,
Okay.
or a little bit after 3. And also usually in the early afternoon is like when I'm like probably outside walking the dog, so I'm taking longer walks. So which is contributing to the decrease in my blood glucose. Um,
Yeah. So are these dips here,
yeah,
like, you think at this time when you're walking the dog or
yeah.
after you're walking the dog?
Yep.
Yeah. So what do you usually do before you exercise or do some physical activity? Do you do anything different with your diabetes management?
Um, no, no, not really. I usually keep like my basal rate the same.
Okay.
So I don't really make any major changes to that, to anything. Not really.
So if you found that you did drop each time you went for a walk, there's a couple options. One, you could have about 15 grams of carbohydrate with some. I always say like a bar that has some protein in it too, not just pure carbohydrate. Before you go on the walk, or you can use a temp basal if that's what you decide is right for you with your healthcare provider. You could
Yeah.
decrease the basal, but you'd want to start that at least like an hour and a half before you go on the walk. So there's time for it to help actually reduce what's impacting your bloodstream
Yeah.
when you're walking.
So what would happen like towards the end of the appointment? After we've like gone through all of the Libre data, because as we can see, like it's 13 pages long. Libre data, so we have a lot of data just for 2 weeks. Um, but at this point, at the end of the appointment, what would you recommend to a patient? What if they have type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes? What are the next steps?
Yeah. So what I do throughout the appointment is I actually kind of jot down some notes about what we're identifying. So for you, Tiara, I would have put down, okay, she's dipping in the afternoon, and it seems to be after she's going on walks. And then I would also jot down eating after dinner. So we would I'd jot down those patterns that we're seeing and what we talked about. And then I'd go back to the patient. I'd re-emphasize everything that we learned from looking at the daily logs. What do you want to work on
Oh,
over
that's
the next
great.
couple
Yes.
of weeks?
Um, I guess so for me, I want to work on getting those evening highs down. And figuring out what uh what's going on with me at that time. Am I eating too late? Am I exercising at that time and then trying to make up for that exercise by eating so that way I don't drop low at night? Do I have a fear of hypos? Um, you know, for me, I would go home and pay more attention to my behaviors between the hours of like 8 to 12 because I'm seeing that's where the rise starts.
So
Um,
do you think it would be realistic for me to have you kind of journal each day to check in with yourself and to kind of see what's happening at that point in time for you?
yeah. So for me, it would be realistic because I use my phone for to capture my Libre data.
Okay.
And when you scan, you can add in some notes. So since I'm already on my phone, I can kind of just scribble down some things, some key things I would remember.
Yes,
I
you can. And that's a great idea.
Yeah, instead of like, I think when it comes to journaling, we think of it as like long drawn out sentences, but it doesn't have to be that. It's just key
Mm-mm.
things that will remind you of what's going on at that time. So when you look back, you know exactly what's going on.
Awesome. And so do you feel like this was helpful today? Do you feel like you learned a lot?
I do. I really love learning about the GMI that kind of predicts your A1C. I think a key takeaway here is knowing the importance of having as much data as possible and getting
Yeah.
those, that at least once every day hours scan. And to know that the more data that your provider has, the better that they can help you, and also the better that you can help yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you're especially if you're only going to the doctor once every 3 months, this is a great tool. LibreView is a really great tool to be able to see everything in one sitting. And also, if you're using LibreView, you can see 2 weeks worth of data up to 90 days worth of data in one sheet. So
Yeah.
um, you have options to be able to look at your data holistically, and you can be your own care specialist because as a person with diabetes, whether if you're type 2 or type 1, you are still the number one person on your care team. And
Oh, yeah.
and the great thing about having something like LibreView is that you have the data to empower yourself and you can see those trends. And I think with telehealth specifically, being able to go through this data with you, Julia, it makes me feel like a partner in my own care. So, um, us going through like the patterns and then having you ask really good questions gets me to think more and deeper about my diabetes management. So, I hope anyone who's watching this will feel that same a similar sense of empowerment as well.
I hope so too, because that's our job as a diabetes care and education specialist. We hope to empower you and to help you in a way, it's your diabetes and, we're on your team and we want to help you kind of reach your goals.